Hello, everyone. I am so sorry for keeping you all waiting. Due to some technical issues, we don't have Tananarive or Jervey here with us. But right now, we do have Gary Phillips. Hello, Gary.
Nicholas, how are you, sir?
Good. We're pivoting, right? We're making
Yes, we
do.
are.
Just in case things clear up on Tananarive's or Gervais' side, we'll try to get them in as soon as we possible. But if not, we have the lovely Gary Phillips here for everyone. For those who are maybe tuning in who aren't familiar, Gary Phillips has published novels, comics, and short stories and edited numerous anthologies. Violent Spring, first published in 1994, was named one of the essential crime novels of Los Angeles. Tananarive Due, who's not here with us right now, but is an American Book Award-winning author who teaches Black horror and Afrofuturism at UCLA. She has published several books, including the novels My Soul to Keep and The Good House, and the collection Ghost Summer Stories. And Jervey Tervalon is the author of 6 books, including Understand This, for which he has won the Quality Paperback Book Club's New Voices Award. That's a long title. Currently, he's the executive director of Literature for Life, an educational advocacy organization, and creative director of Pasadena Lit Fest. But today, we are here to discuss Gary's, Tananarive's, and Gervais' South Central Noir. For everyone who hasn't yet gotten their copy, how dare you wait so long? But you can go ahead and click the link below. This is by Central Noir and get a signed bookplate. We do have bookplates signed by all 3 authors, and we'll make sure to get those to you while supplies last. Lastly, if anyone has any questions they want to ask later on the program of Gary, go ahead and click Ask a Question link below, and we'll go ahead and get those later on the program. So, Gary, tell us about South Central Noir.
All right, Nick, thank you. I suppose it kind of starts, or at least the genesis for this actual anthology starts a couple of years ago, and I've done some other work with Akashic Books. Akashic is the publisher of this, and people, I'm sure some of our viewers may know that Akashic has published something like, I believe 100 or maybe a little more than 100 of these kinds of various noirs set in various cities, various locales. There's been Los Angeles Noir, Los Angeles Noir, the classics. I previously edited Orange County Noir for Akashic. There's been Indian Country Noir, Lone Star Noir, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, as well as various foreign locales. And so in that context, I've developed a pretty good relationship with Johnny Temple. Johnny's the publisher of Akashic Books. So a couple of years ago, I just sort of noodling on, how different ideas sort of come to you now and then, and noodling on this idea for South Central Noir, which is very specific kind of place here in Los Angeles, but South Central due to gangster rap and various movies and what have you, has had a reputation for good and for ill. I think, certainly it's fair to say in various corners of the world. And so I was thinking about that, and I grew up in South Central. And so I thought, well, what about a South Central Noir? And I pitched that idea to Johnny, but just really very briefly, just pretty much a few sentences about that. And at that point, Johnny hit me back, and he said, well, I think it's a pretty good idea, but I've got a lot of things in the queue, and let's try to, revisit that within about a half a year or so. All right. So a half a year goes by. And sure enough, either I thought about it again, or maybe even Johnny might have brought it up again, because he'll do that. And anyway, so I said, well, what about that idea? And he said, okay, fine. And so once he said yes, and then we started to talk about, what the book could be, and various places within South Central to talk about or to locate within the stories. I then kind of produced kind of a working document where I kind of talked a little bit about the history of South Central. I talked a little bit about some of the infamous as well as famous both places and landmarks, as well as incidents that have happened within the confines. And I broadly defined South Central as a sort of 33 square mile area. So I've sort of made that clear, in the context of the stories. And with that in mind, Johnny then talked about it with the staff. Everybody seemed to get on board. And as they always do, and Akashic, of course, is a very great publisher to work with. They're always very enthusiastic. It's just a great group of people, Johanna and Aaron, all those folks there. Ibrahim, who used to be there, now was at Viking. Anyway, all I just say is that everybody was digging it. Then once that was kind of formed, then the idea of then who to ask, because the template that Johnny uses now in these noir books is that it's 14 writers, no more, no less. Being the editor, I might add, I of course knew I was going to do a story, so it's 13 writers I had to go find. But then I already had in mind that I obviously wanted writers, not just Black writers, not just white writers, but we've got Asian folks, we've got all kinds of folks, covering sort of the spectrum of what is South Central, and certainly the South Central that I knew growing up. And so in the context of that, we have Naomi Hirahara, we have Steph Cha, we have Jerry Westerson, we have Tananarive Due and Jervey Tervalon, we have Eric Stone. Anyway, we have a great cross-section of folks. Emory Holmes' story. And not only do we have a great cross-section of folks, we have a great cross-section of eras covered in the book. And so we've gone all the way back to like sort of the late 20s in Emory's story, which centers around the Dunbar Hotel, which actually still exists, but it exists in a different form now. But back in those days when LA was sort of a what was a segregated city, really due to housing covenants, some other practices. It was the place on Central Avenue, among a couple of other Black hotels, where not only Black entertainers stayed, but folks who had some means stayed, and along Central Avenue were the various jazz clubs and what have you. So we have his story, we have Naomi's story, which is I Am Yojimbo, which is set during the closing of the Kokusai Theater, which was at the time was a Japanese theater on Crenshaw Boulevard that showed Japanese films with subtitles. But this was like during the 80s when, in fact, there was still and it still is a little bit of a presence even now, but even then was a larger presence of Japanese Americans in the Crenshaw area, along with Black folks. Tananarive's story, which is kind of a ghost story, actually two ghost stories. Jerry's Westerson's story is a ghost story as well. And then there's How Hope Found Chauncey, which is Jervey's story, and it's set in a kind of it's an actual place. I suppose if the owners of this place ever found out that we use their name, they might sue us. But it's called the Snooty Fox Motor Inn, which is kind of this motel, kind of a strange motel on Western Avenue, which is also part of South Central. So all that to say is that the folks who came on board, I left it up to them to where they wanted to set their stories, what time period they want to set their stories, when, where, all that. And really, it was just kind of to somewhat luck of the draw and serendipitous that we covered these various time periods, that we covered a swath of incidents that had happened in South Central. Of course, we had to, I shouldn't say of course, but part of that would be the 92 riots, the Rodney King riots that happened in Los Angeles. The Steph Cha stories about that, and set during that time period or aftermath of that. Even my story reflects on that in some ways. And so anyway, all that to say is that I think there's a great depth and breadth of material that the writers covered.
Wow, that is very deep. So you had mentioned this. Johnny said he likes to have 14 authors exactly. Do you know where that number, I'm just curious, do you know where that number came from? Just like 14 exactly, no more, no less.
Yeah, I'm not. Well, I think what I think has come from now is having done 100 and some odd of these, they've kind of figured out. We're going to pay X amount for in advance, right? We're going to pay the editor X amount of advance. We make so much, we make X, selling these kinds of books, and so that I think that's part of the formula. If I would have had my druthers, I probably would have liked to have had at least 3 or 4 more other writers, you know what I mean? But it is what it is. And so what it does force you to do, I will say this thing, what it does force you to do is it's like, okay, in my case, like I said, I know I got 13 writers I got to get. So I want to cover a lot of folks. Oh, and I should also mention we have a couple of Latino writers in there, Roberto Lovato, Desiree Zamorano, and I thought that was very important because obviously the South Central I grew up in, which is the South Central of the day in Los Angeles is predominantly Latino, which is a shift from predominantly Black. Anyway, all that to say is that it really made me think, obviously, about who I wanted to select, or who I want to invite. I should say that, who I want to invite. And they're all great writers. They all brought their A game to the table. But it really made me then, I guess it really made me, narrow down who to ask and why to ask them, and understanding, and not really being a heavy hand about it, but understanding that these folks were professionals. These folks are going to take this very seriously, and they will therefore, I think they'll have fun, but they'll therefore deliver stories that I think people will find both entertaining as well as, provide a little bit of thought-provoking verisimilitude, a little bit of material that which you can digest and think about even when you put the story down.
So with 14 authors in mind, or 13 minus you, because you're going to be one of 14.
Right.
So did you have any of the authors already in mind to reach out to when you knew, okay, I need to get 13 other authors? Or how was that process of finding that wide swath to go over?
Right. I mean, that's a good question, because you're right. We don't, unlike, I suppose, some anthologies which do open calls, we do not, or at least, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say it like that. I usually don't do an open call. I've had it where it's been a mixture, right? Where you'll have some invited and a few open, open to everybody, and they just sort of pitch their ideas and you select from that. But I guess I've tended to more or less be, for lack of a better term, more curator heavy, right? So that I've already thought about, or at least I'll think about who the writers are. If I'm thinking about what the theme of the anthology is, what that could be, what that could cover, I suppose even then I always start to write down on my yellow pad, who the writers could be, and it might be a longer list, as some folks I ask who don't have availability, or don't have time, and don't have the availability. Obviously, I asked my buddy Walter Mosley. Walter's a heck of a busy man, and he begged off. But and then others who for various reasons couldn't do a story. But then I finally got it down, or finally, in terms of the response, finally got it down to that golden 13. So I guess you always start, obviously, or at least my opinion or my experience has been, having now done a number of anthologies, edited a number of anthologies, or co-edited a number of anthologies, you always want to start with a sort of a longer list than what you're going to wind up with.
Yeah. Oh, and looks like Tananarive is here, so she'll be joining us, hopefully. Just real quick then, I see that... Hello!
Hey, sorry about that.
No worries.
Everyone, welcome to Tananarive. Hello, Tanana.
Good to be. Hi, good. I'm glad to be here.
How are you doing?
We're moving, so I'm frazzled.
Oh my goodness! Oh my gosh!
But thank goodness for Google Calendar. So that's why I'm here right now.
There we go.
So Gary just did a great job of describing where South Central Noir came from, getting the authors like yourself to join in. So what did you want to include about the process of being reached out to or writing your story for this?
Well, anytime Gary Phillips reaches out, I'm going to reach back. I mean, what can I say? We are former co-faculty at Antioch University of Los Angeles.
That's right.
Have known each other for a very long time, and I know he doesn't do no trash, so I'm in.
Love it.
So it's very kind. So, Tananarive, you should tell us the title of your story and a little bit about what it is about.
Yes. Okay. So I wanted, full disclosure, as I said in the LA Times interview, I lived in Glendora at the time, and now it's even worse. I live in Upland, so I'm like farther and farther east. So part of me was fighting imposter syndrome. How am I going to write about South Central LA, an area that is so storied and mythic? And I just thought about my times visiting the area. Like when I've been there, it was usually to go to the bookstore, SO1 bookstore. And that whole
you should tell me what SO1 bookstore is, and
oh
soon
yeah,
was.
SO1 is, I hate to say was, but
yeah.
is a Black-owned bookstore in Leimert Park, and is like so many wonderful Black bookstores I've had the pleasure of being associated with since I started publishing in 1995, where the booksellers know all the works and know all the authors, will hand sell you at the counter, like, you know, oh, if you're reading that, then you definitely want to read this, because they have their finger on the pulse. And James Fugate is one of the owners there, and you know, and Tom, and I haven't been there in a very long time because, well, for a lot of reasons, but COVID really derailed so many things. Haven't had a book to promote, one thing. So I haven't seen them in a while, but I was thinking about that area, and frankly, watching Issa Rae's Insecure, the changes I could see that had taken place just in this TV series compared to what I knew. I was like, holy cow. And then I heard a story that really broke my heart about a man who was shot to death at a food court. And to me, that's one of the things that happens with gentrification, is that the people who live in the neighborhood are suddenly the outside threat. And the kind of thing that would happen in Brentwood is now happening, you know, at a mall where Black people should feel comfortable and safe, you know, not feel like you're going to be profiled and shot to death. I mean, I don't know all the details of the cases, but I think so often police are too quick to shoot. And it sounded like one of those cases. So I thought, well, let me write a story about a bookseller who's watching all these changes unfold. And as I always do, or often do, I hid the real life horror, which is gentrification, which is these kinds of shootings, which is being uprooted and displaced, with supernatural horror. He thinks he's seeing a ghost. And then it becomes about his search for the ghost and his evidence that there's a ghost. And we're all convinced there's a ghost. And then there's a twist at the end that, that I won't get into.
That's right. You got to buy the book and read it. That's
right. But that was the first thing I thought of, because my relationship with that part of Los Angeles has been through the bookstore for the most part.
And Gary, I noticed here that the book is separated into 3 different parts: Always and Forever, Cold Sweat, The World is a Ghetto. Can you talk about that? How you separate into 3 parts?
Well, you know, I think this has something to do with, you know, Johnny. Johnny's a guitarist, right? You know, he's a musician. In fact, he sent me an email earlier today. He's back on the road again, doing his gigs. So he's back he's somewhere. I forget where he was, but maybe somewhere else in New York. But anyway, I know he's back on the road doing some gigs with his band. And in fact, that's how Akashic even started. It was they were the last big thing, or one of the last big things before the record industry all went up, you know, got upended because of digital downloading, Boys Against Girls. Anyway, all I just say is that so Johnny has a real musical thing, and so all the books. All the noir books have always been sort of divided in that way. Not always with musical titles. These are all musical titles, which he and I sort of jockeyed around with. At first, I had 4 different categories, which is usually the norm, right? Because the 14 stories, we kind of all break them up somewhat evenly into these 4 categories. But Johnny didn't think those 4 categories worked, and we kind of went back and forth, and now we came up with the 3. Which I think if you know, as you said, Nick, if you read the titles and you kind of see the stories that are there, I think you kind of understand how they sort of come together like that under that heading. And also I think, you know, I'm not a musician. I have been told, you know, with this voice of mine, I should be able to sing. I can't hold a note, but that's okay. It's a family thing. It's my dad's voice, and he couldn't sing either. And my son's voice is deeper than mine. He can't sing either. So we've carried on the tradition, you know, the Phillips tradition, well and true. But all that to say is that I'm a frustrated musician. And my wife actually can play guitar, and she's actually a pretty good singer. So all that to say is that, but the music has always been, you know, that thing that's, you know, that little subset that's run through my life, whether it's jazz or blues or Hendrix or whatever, right? You know, And so it just seemed to me on a natural kind of vibe that, yes, it made sense that these stories, which I think, again, as we said, we cover these various time periods in South Central, and from Tananarive's ghost story, which is not the only ghost story in the book, I might add, to Emery's, which is set in the 20s, and Jervey's, which is about these two young ladies who are just trying to survive in the very mean city. I think so. Then the idea that, yes, that these song titles could, in a certain way, crystallize what, at least if you group those stories together, what the kind of feelings were about those stories. And even then, it doesn't quite capture it. So, but hopefully, it's the part of what draws you in, and hopefully, then will compel you to then read further.
What about tell us a little bit about your story that you included in here, Death of a Sideman?
Yeah, thank you. Death of a Sideman has a character in there named McGrady, and I'd written a previous novella with this guy. He's a Vietnam vet. He's formerly homeless. He's now not homeless. He's formerly an alcoholic. I mean, I guess you're always I should say you're always an alcoholic, but now he's sober.
He's recovering. Yeah,
he's recovering. Exactly, he's in recovery. He's been working the steps. He's been working the program. He's keeping his head down. He's got a job. And it starts with him in Leimert Park. Actually, it's back to Leimert Park at the World Stage, another kind of institution in our city, particularly in South Central. And one of the jazz musicians is another Vietnam vet. Now they didn't serve in the same unit, but they knew each other in Nam because there's this little brief flashback to a place called Soul Alley. Soul Alley was an actual locale within Saigon, and there was a few blocks in Saigon of these, dive bars and little jive nightclubs, but where the black GIs hung out. And so that's how they got to know each other, and we kind of see that little clip and that little flashback with these guys. And then we, reel back into the present. And of course, because this is a book about noir and bad things happening to sometimes good people, sometimes bad people. The buddy that McGrady is hanging out with, he's gone back to the guy's, he's giving the guy a ride back to his pad at Exposition Park. And the guy up and dies in his apartment. And then, of course, things get revealed about this man's past. Maybe that death was natural causes. Maybe the death was not natural causes. Mm-hmm. And we also get to reveal a little bit about McGrady and who he is as he then sort of delves into his buddy's past, which then gets us into a sort of bigger thing, which also touches on the 92, the events of 92, but even beyond that.
Okay. Tananarive, what was it like when you were reached out? Were you told, like, okay, this is what we want you to, like, story-wise make, or were you just given the idea of what South Central Noir was going to be, and for you to see what would fit in it?
He said, "Here, you're going to do this. Do it now." No,
never.
Whoa! It was more of a request, like,
yes.
Okay.
I love the noir series, first of all, too. So I was in Atlanta Noir. Terry Jones edited that, so that was, I'm always happy to join. That was not a supernatural story. So I think my first question to Gary was, because, there's pressure when you get these invitations. Not every story comes out the way you want it to come out. So I've written some great stories for minor publications and okay stories for major publications. Because you don't know. And like, what are you going to write? What are you going to write is a huge, huge question. So because horror is my wheelhouse and it's my preference, that was my first question. Can it be a ghost story? Can it have a horror? Can it be like a horror paranormal? And he was like, sure. So then boom, that was all I needed, basically, is like to think about, okay, my association with the bookstore, which I wish now in retrospect, I didn't know that SO1 was going to be closing. I definitely would have dedicated the story to them more overtly instead of hinting around like I was.
Yeah. But you're still prescient in that regard, Tananarive. Yeah.
But yeah, that was it. It's like, can it be a ghost story? That's just my first love. And they usually aren't, frankly. Noir isn't synonymous with paranormal by any means, even though I think you can blend those lines and merge those lines and have some fun talking about a real life issue with a little bit of the emotional distance of reading it through the fantasy premise.
Yeah, one of our other booksellers, Rob, shout out to Rob, when he saw that you were going to be on this, he was like, "Oh, Tananarive's going to be part of this. She's a great horror writer." So
great.
You got a fan in the bookstore going, "Oh my God,
Rob has an amazing taste. Good for you,
does.
Rob."
That's right.
As a reminder for everyone who's watching, if you have any questions that you would like to submit, go ahead and submit them under the Ask a Question button, and I will ask those of the authors here. So how long was the process, Gary, to get all of the stories together, get them worked into South Central Noir? How long and what did you have to do for that?
It's funny, man. I had been asked that before, I guess, when we did the roundtable for Paula Woods for the LA Times piece. And you know how it is. Partly it's just a function of age now. I think the time is just sort of collapsing together, man. It's like, some 20 years ago, fine, I can call it right up. 2 weeks ago, well, I don't know. It's all, kind of a blur. But as I said, I mean, I think once I re-asked Johnny, right? Because as I said, I posed the question to Johnny a couple of years ago. I didn't even think it was a couple of years ago. I think it was maybe 18 or 19 months ago. About a South Central Noir, and then, half a year goes by, and I posed it to him again. So here we are. We're in 2022. So somewhere in 2021, we started doing this. But honestly, it really does not seem like it had been even that much time. I just think because I think everybody, like I said, man, everybody is, knocked it out the park. Everybody, came with their A game. The stories are just, just wonderful, man. They're just lovely. They're just such a, like I said, just a wide swath of material and kinds of emotions and feelings that they evoke. And it was just such a joy to, and I if nothing, I try to, Tananarive mentioned, there's a difference between sort of editing your students' work in an MFA program and editing professionals' work, and I don't mean that in the way it's
no. You can mean it.
Yeah, but Tananarive knows what I'm talking about.
Yes, I know.
Yeah,
those extra few drafts make it.
That's actually exactly. Well, exactly. But all that to say is that for instance, now, and I knew this going in. My buddy Emery, right, who wrote The Golden Coffin. I knew Emery was going to write long, because I've worked with Emery before. So Emery came in with, 17,000 words. I said, well, Emery, we got to kind of bring it in, brother. And by the way, we going to have to need some kind of crime or something in there because, which is great. Whatever description. It's great descriptions. There's wonderful characters. It's lovely, man. It's great. But somehow or another, we got to, come on, brother. We got to get, but that's fine because I knew that going in with Emery.
Get stabby with it.
That's it. Roberto Lovato. Roberto and I have known each other a long time. We worked together in nonprofits and social justice stuff, and et cetera, et cetera. And Roberto's memoir, it's nonfiction memoir, this kid from El Salvador in LA, made the New York Times bestseller list. But this is his first foray into fiction. Now I knew he wanted to do fiction, and I knew he was leaning to do fiction. I know, in fact, he's working on a screenplay now. But he and I had long talks about the structure of the story. What is noir? How do you reveal the mystery? All that kind of stuff that some of the other folks who write mysteries, and Tananarive and all those will know because they've done it. He was a little unsure, but that's okay. We talked about that, and we got there. And he was willing to put in the work, man, because he sweated, right? He sweated bullets to come to the finished that finished draft, but he did it. He did the work, and so it's always a mixture. But that's okay because I listen. These are great folks. I know these folks. To lesser or greater degree. I work with these people before, these writers before, and so I think as long as I'm aware of that as the editor, listen, man, I don't get nervous. I don't get out of pocket, and I also know, by the way, that we'll have a certain amount of leeway with Johnny, because I never mentioned to Johnny, Johnny, I got a couple of ghost stories. Well, no, I'm just going to put them in the packet. They'll be in the mix, and he'll see them and he'll do whatever he does with them. You know what I mean? But I will say this, in fact, to Johnny's credit, and it's too bad Jervey's not with us tonight. As I said, I think Jervey is either in Berlin or on his way to Berlin. Years ago, Jervey and I did for Akashic, the Cocaine Chronicles, right? And as the name suggests, all the stories had to do about that scourge, about that white powder, and I did a story in that. And this actually, I'm a little proud of myself because I did this before sort of the zombie craze. My story was a zombie story, right? And I wasn't even sure. Even then, I was like, well, Johnny might think, well, this has nothing to do. You know what I mean? Cocaine is in there, but this is so out in left field as opposed to the other stuff, which is more grounded in reality. Will he okay it? But he did. So I have to say, listen, again, there is something lovely about working with Akashic, which is not a giant publisher, but it's not that small a publisher anymore. But, it's just at the right size where, one, you can communicate with staff and you have that kind of give and take, and that they're willing to take a chance. So listen, man, really, again, hats off to Akashic for rolling with us on this.
Yeah, I want to give a shout out to Akashic too. I've been very curious about Akashic for years, and I have a collection coming out. This is not meant to be as pluggy as it sounds, but I have a collection coming out next year. We're working with Johnny in that regard.
Right on.
It's also been great.
Right
so
on.
Shout out to Akashic. And in fact, people may not know this, but speaking of taking chances, that Samuel L. Jackson audiobook, The After Sleep? That's them. That's them.
Yeah. That's right.
So they've got some attitude,
That's right. There you go.
Can you say anything about that collaboration yet, or too soon?
What collaboration?
The one for next year. The one.
Oh, my collection.
Your collection, yeah.
Well, I believe this story will be in it. If I think I might have to get the editor's permission. I don't know, but whatever. But yeah, it's just, I love short fiction. That's the thing. I've been publishing novels since 1995 and learning screenwriting, really digging into learning screenwriting in the past 5 years, but it's been more like 20 years overall.
Right on.
And it would be easy to dismiss short stories because, let's just be real. They don't make a lot of money, right? Yeah. That's not why you write short stories, to get rich. Right. I'm writing short stories to get rich, said no one ever. But the ironic part, and I tell I used to tell my MFA students this all the time, because they would come in with the second book in a trilogy and still learning how to write. You're still learning scene construction and try to scale it down. Yeah. In fact, one of my former students did just that. She took a piece of her novel, what would have been a prologue to it, and published it actually in another noir, Haiti noir, actually, one of these books. And she's a beautiful writer, but it takes a long time to write a novel. Yeah. And it takes a long time to learn how to write while writing a novel or a novel series. And I started with short stories. I learned beginning, middle, and end writing short stories. I learned how do you create a character people can believe in just a few pages. How do you make them real and jump off the page in just a few pages? It's not easy, you know. So people mistake me saying write short stories like it's training wheels. It takes less time typically to write a short story, but they're hard. You have to encapsulate a lot in a small amount of space. So it's great for writers of all levels, and I think more people should read short story anthologies, starting actually with this one, South Central Noir. Now there's the plug.
There's a plug. Very good. I like how you did that. That's clever. That's pretty good, Tananarive. I see what you did there. That's good.
Oh, great. Look at that. He just put the pre-order information for the wishing pool. See, I forgot to mention the title of it.
That's right. Always, that's right. Always on the
I
title.
didn't know I was
Oh,
allowed to
hey,
say that yet, but
I'm not in practice yet. You know, it's been a minute.
Rob found it. Rob found it for you. So, what other? First, I must know though, what kind of feedback did Gary give you, Tananarive, about your story when you first submitted it?
Nice try.
Oh, that's
make it better next time. No, actually, he was a very light touch as an editor. I'm trying to think.
Very little, I think.
I don't really think.
I think I had a couple of questions. Really, honestly, that's about it.
Yeah, we're very small, like sort of logistical.
Yeah,
something about you know, a window. You know, just sort of seeing the set. I guess would be the best.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
But other than that, I was thrilled that he liked it as much as he did. Because here's the thing: no matter, for me anyway, no matter how long I've been publishing, I mean, there are times I feel like I got it right. Like it's like, yeah, this is really tight. But I've had that feeling about stories that we're not actually really tight. So the point is, every time another voice, an editor, a reader tells you that they like something, that's kind of like the first time you figure out, oh, maybe this is okay. Maybe this is pretty good. No, but otherwise, you don't really know. You always feel like it is, or often I do. You know, I'm in that character's head. I'm living their life. It's just hitting the right notes to resonate with readers and make sense to readers and play all those keys in the right order to create the emotional response you're looking for. You know, I got all the emotions. I'm feeling them. That's why I'm writing the story. But how do you convey those emotions to someone else? That's the hard part.
That's great. That's true.
Well, and aside from obviously this collection, which everyone you can purchase right now and get a signed book plate, what other short story collections would you shout out to people that they're definitely good reads, whatever genre? There's great story collections.
Holy cow.
I know.
It's a very broad question, very out of left field.
Well, I've got one, and I can't quite remember. Oh my God! It's Richard Matheson, who was kind of really speaking of horror and sci-fi, and I don't quite remember the title. Richard Matheson, I guess one of his more famous novellas was I Am Legend, which has now been remade at least 3 times, maybe 4 times. I think there might be a bootleg version too.
I got a big shout out to A People's Future of the United States.
There you go.
It's a speculative fiction collection that I think it just came out maybe last year, or who knows? It could be like 3 years ago. Who knows? Time. What is time?
Yes.
But Victor Laval and John Joseph Adams co-edited that, and it has like so many great speculative stories. And K. Jemison, and you know, I've got a story in there. I think it's a really tight collection.
Excellent.
Oh yes, I remember when this came out. Yeah, great. A lot of great people in that one.
And the Matheson collection I was thinking of, I mean, I just remember the first story, which is one of the, I mean, they're all good in that, is Born of Man and Woman, which is just I just remember reading that. I must have read that 30 years ago, but I just remember that thing just knocked me out. Oh, Duel is one of the other stories that people might know Matheson from.
Oh yeah, I see that. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So no one is submitting questions.
What?
I don't know why.
We've just answered everything.
We know they're there.
Wonderful people, though.
Yeah.
So, Gary, Tananarive mentioned this, but what about you? What do you have going on in the works that you're excited about that you would like to talk about?
Well, you know, I finished the sequel to. I had a novel that come out earlier this year called One Shot Harry from Soho Crime, and it's set in '63 in L.A. It's a crime fiction novel. It's about a crime photographer, in fact, and the character is inspired loosely by 2 real characters: Harry Adams, who was a black photographer here in Los Angeles, who shot stuff for the black newspapers, as well as I think Jet and Ebony and what have you. And of course, the infamous Ouija, who was Arthur Felig, who was a crime photographer in New York City in the heyday of mob rubouts and such in the 30s and 40s. and he actually inspired a late 50s, early 60s TV show called Man with a Camera with Charles Bronson. How about that? And then later on a film in the early 90s with Joe Pesci. And so anyway, those two characters, I kind of melded them together and made my character, Harry Ingram, who's an African-American Korean War vet. And so the first novel was set in 63 in LA, and MLK has returned to LA to speak at, we had a Wrigley Field in Los Angeles, not as big as famous as the one in Chicago, but it was in South Central. It was at 41st and Avalon. And so there's that story. And so now the second novel, which like I said, turned in, is set during, we jump right into the middle of the Watts Uprising in 65. Harry's right in the middle of it, of course, taking his pictures. And of course, once again, Harry's getting his butt beat by the cops. So all that to say is that starts that off. So I'm kind of happy with that. And that's, I guess that'll be out at some point next year. And I too also have a collection of my my short stories. They'll be coming out also from Soho at some point.
You have a name for it yet, or still under wraps?
Yeah, well, I don't know. It could be called Trouble in the Deep, but I'm not sure. I'm not quite clear what title we're going to go with. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But everyone, keep an eye out. Look out for it.
There we go. That's it.
All right. Well, unfortunately, since we don't have any audience questions, and I'm pretty much out of questions, was there anything else that you would like to talk about before we end our program tonight?
Well, I just want to re-emphasize what Tananarive said about this question of, and I'd actually been on a panel a couple of weeks ago about this notion of, short stories, the short story market, but the benefit of short stories. And I will say this. I just think, as you said, that I think short stories can get you in there and, one of those things you can read in one setting and really get the full flavor. You can get characterization. You can get the plot. You get the machinations. You can get the twist, the reveal. And I think it's all there. I mean, now, the benefit and the deficit, I suppose, of short stories is you don't get into subplots and sort of side tributaries as you might get into in a novel. But I think that's okay. I think a short story is designed to sort of move you along and to bring you to a certain conclusion. And I think that's fine. And I also think because they're short stories, or maybe this is the benefit of short stories, is, at least from my viewpoint, I think the things that you start to see these mashup of genres where it's horror and crime, or it's science fiction and mystery or science fiction and horror. Anyway, so all that to say that there's a easier way to blend those genres and to maybe not even give them a name, but to sort of fool with those tropes and those forms in a short story where you don't have to sustain it as long. I think sometimes sustaining that kind of blend, that kind of mix, could be tough in a novel. It certainly can be done, and there are writers who do it. But I think the benefit of short story is you can do it and give it to the reader, and hopefully have them satisfied, and then they go to the next story.
I think you're.
I 100% agree. I'm back, and I will add to that even though it's not a good bet that you can get rich writing a short story, short stories get optioned all the time.
That's
In
right.
fact, I believe the TV show Justified was inspired by a short story. So, I mean, it helps maybe if you're Elmore Leonard. But my point is,
yes,
short stories get optioned and make people money all the time. So,
that's funny. You should say it's
writers,
true. Yeah,
with short stories.
Yeah, that's right. No, but and it really has been, an old school buddy of mine who's passed on, Millard Kaufman. He wrote this. I guess his most famous screenplay was Bad Day at Black Rock, right? This great little film with Spencer Tracy and Robert Ryan and Lee Marvin, and that's based on a short story. It's called Bad Day at Honda, of all things, but it's based on a short story. Or what became High Noon is based on a short story. Or actually back to Matheson. It wasn't several Matheson short stories have been turned into films and the TV stuff. So yeah, I mean, the idea that the short story, I think, as we both said, can sort of just grab you and bring you along and kind of bring you to this conclusion, and it's clear, right? And it's sort of in a lot of ways unvarnished. I think speaks highly of the form, but also why it is that form then will often find new life in television or films or cable now, because in fact it's so efficient and it's so clear in what it delivers.
Boom.
Nice.
There you go.
All right. Then lastly, before we go, where's a good place that people can see you on social media? Do you have a website you want to plug? Get stuff out there?
Well, I'm at www.tananarivedue.com, just like my name. Also at Tananarive Due on Twitter and Instagram. And I am on Facebook, but honestly, not that often. So Twitter's the best way to find me.
Well, I don't do none of that stuff you young people do. I am on Facebook though, occasionally. But I do have a website, gdphillips.com. And so there you go.
Great. Gary, Tananarive, thank you so much for being here.
Sure.
So glad to have you, Tananarive.
Thanks for having us.
I know.
Yeah.
Sorry I was late, but I'm glad I'm
here.
here.
All good.
And you made it even better.
All
right. Thank you, everyone who joined us. Don't forget, while supplies last, if you get a copy of South Central Noir with us, we do have book plates signed by all 3 authors.
I had to go to the post office for that, y'all. So please. Okay. I do.
That's it.
I broke my no post office rule to make sure I wouldn't mess this up. I was the last one, and I couldn't fumble that ball.
Hilarious. That's it. That's great.
So y'all need to make this happen. Make sure these book plates go to terms.
Please take those book plates with those books.
Gary, Tananarive, thank you so much. I hope you have a great evening.
All right.
And thank you, Nicholas, and thank you, Mysterious Galaxy, for hosting us. It was lovely.
Great.
Yeah, of course.
Good to see you.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
All right, you guys. Bye-bye. Good night.